getting jiggy with it.
Alright, well today we are going to do our notes on fractions, decimals, and percent, so go ahead and take out your composition notebook. We're going to turn to the table of contents, and on page number 7 we are going to write fractions, decimals, and percents. Okay, so make sure you have that written in your table of contents. And then we're going to go ahead and turn to page 7 in our notebook. Okay, in the top right-hand corner, you're going to put a number 7 so that we know that this is page 7. And like always, we're going to do our title. Our title is fractions, decimals, and percents. Today in class you were given a foldable. The foldable looks like this. You're going to cut out your foldable along the thick black line. You're then going to fold over the 2/3 in, and you're going to cut along here. Let me just show you what it's going to look like after you cut it out, so you make sure you do all the correct folds. So this was your foldable. You're going to fold it over so that the 2 ends meet in the middle. And you're going to cut it so that you have 3 flaps on each side. Okay, so go ahead, feel free to pause the video so that you can go ahead and cut that out. Okay, before we actually glue it in, we're going to do our notes. I have 4 different colored pencils that I'm using today. Okay, I have a blue, a purple, an orange, and a teal. You can use whatever colors you like. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go from percents to fractions. So on this top left booklet, I'm going to write percents in orange. I'm going to write fractions in purple. I'm just going to take my regular pencil and draw an arrow showing that I'm going from percents to fractions. Okay. Then if I go ahead and I open my flap, I'm going to write the steps on the inside, and we're going to do an example on the flap. Okay, so go ahead and take your pencil. Step number 1, how we change percents to fractions, is we rewrite the percent over 100. Okay, rewrite and then I'm going to write my percent symbol in orange since my percents are orange. Rewrite the percent over, and then I'm going to use my teal colored pencil to write the number 100 because that is the important information in this step. Rewrite the percent over 100. Step number 2 is just to simplify. Okay, I'm going to pick up my orange colored pencil again, and the first example that I'm going to give you for this one is the percent 42. So I'm going to go ahead and write 42%. The first step says to rewrite the percent over 100, so I'm going to take my teal and I'm going to rewrite, I'm going to show an arrow that I'm taking 42%, and I'm going to rewrite the percent over 100 because I know that every single percent is out of 100, so 42 over 100. The last thing I need to do is to then simplify, so I'm going to take my purple colored pencil because my fractions are in purple, and I'm going to write the fraction 42 over 100 in simplest form. I can divide 42 and 100 both by 2, so my simplest form is going to be 21 over 50. I'm going to box that in because that's going to be my final answer, changing the percent into a fraction. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to show you is we're going to change percents into decimals. So go ahead and fold this back over. I'm going to take my orange again because my percents are in orange, and I'm going to show percents into, and then I'm going to do decimals in blue. Okay, this is how to write your percent as a decimal. Okay, again, I'm going to open it up. There's going to be 2 steps on the inside. The first step is to remove the percent symbol. So step number 1, remove. I'm going to do my percent symbol in orange because all my percents are in orange. Remove the percent sign. Step number 2 is going to be to move the decimal point 2 places to the left. Okay, so step number 2, move decimal point 2 places, and then I'm going to write the word left in teal since that is the most important word in this step. Move the decimal point 2 places left. Okay. The example that I'm going to give you is 42% again, so go ahead and take your orange and write your 42%. This time we're taking the percent and we're making it into a decimal. I'm going to take my teal and I'm going to do my first step in teal. The first step was just to remove the percent symbol. So if I take 42% and I remove the percent symbol, I just simply have 42. Okay. I'm then going to take my blue colored pencil because my decimals are going to be in blue, and I'm going to move the decimal point 2 spaces to the left. Now you can see here that there is no decimal point that I can see. The decimal point in any whole number is all the way at the end. So I'm going to take the decimal point that's at the end and I'm going to move it 2 spaces to the left. It ends up being right in front of the 4. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my another arrow. 0.42 is going to be my final answer, taking the percent into a decimal. Okay, I'm going to write a helpful hint on the side. So if you have your foldable kind of in place where you're going to glue it, I'm going to fold this down. I'm going to pick up my teal and I'm going to write a hint off to the side. Okay, the hint, I'm going to take my regular pencil, is if a decimal is not written in the number, it is at the end. Okay, if a decimal is not written in the number, it is at the end. Okay, just to remind us. Okay, again, like the example, there was no decimal in it, but I knew that it was at the end, so that's just our helpful hint. Okay, we're going to move on to the third one, which is decimals to percent. So take your blue, I'm going to write decimal. Taking my decimal, and I'm going to change it into a percent. Okay, go ahead and open your flap. We're going to have a couple of steps on the inside of this flap. The first step when you're taking a decimal and changing it into a percent is to move the decimal 2 places to the right. Move. Then I'm going to write the word decimal in blue. So move the decimal 2 places to the right. And I'm going to write that word in teal. Move the decimal 2 places to the right. Step number 2 is to add the percent sign. Add the percent sign. Like always, we're going to do an example. The example that I'm going to show you is 0.75. Okay. The first step is to move the decimal 2 places to the right. When I take my decimal and I move it 2 places to the right, so I'm at 0.75, I'm going to show you that I'm taking the decimal and moving it 2 places to the right. And it's going to end up as the percent. I have to add my percent symbol, so I now have 75%. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do decimals to fractions. So go ahead and take your blue and write the word decimal. And then take your purple and write the word fraction. Okay, because we're going to do decimals to fractions. Flip it over on the inside. We're going to do a couple steps. The first step is to say it out loud using place value. So step number 1, say it out loud using place value. Step number 2 is to write the fraction. Write the fraction. And then step number 3 is to simplify. Okay. The example that I'm going to give you is again 0.75. It's my decimal. Step number 1 is to say it out loud using place value. If you say this decimal out loud using your place value, you have 75 and it ends up in the hundredths place. So if I say it out loud using place value, I would say 75 hundredths. Okay, 75 hundredths. You don't have to write it down every single time, but for this first example, I would like you to, so that you know how to do it when you look back at your notes. So 0.75 is 75 hundredths. You're going to write the fraction that you just said. So the fraction that I said, 75 hundredths, is 75 out of 100. When I take 75 out of 100 and I simplify it, my final answer is going to be 3/4. I'm going to box that off because that's my final answer. Okay. 2 more squares to go, okay? This bottom left-hand square is going to be fractions to decimals, so I'm going to take my purple and I'm going to write fraction. I'm taking the fraction and I'm changing it into a decimal. Okay, a couple of steps for this one. So if you flip it open, step number 1, there's actually only one step. It's going to be to divide numerator by denominator. Divide numerator by denominator. And just so you remember how that looks like, I'm going to take my teal and I'm going to make an N representing my numerator. This would be your division box, and then the denominator is on the outside. Okay, the numerator goes on the inside and the denominator goes on the outside. Just so I remember that, I'm going to make another helpful hint before we do our example. So make sure that your foldable is lined up. And then I'm going to make a helpful hint on the left-hand side. And my helpful hint is going to be that the top number goes inside the house. Top number goes inside the house or the box or whatever you call it. Okay. The example that we're going to do from changing a fraction to a decimal is going to be 1/8. So I'm going to take my purple and I'm going to write down the fraction 1/8. Now there's only one step, and that's to divide. So I'm going to set up my division problem. Like I said in my helpful hint, my numerator, my top number, goes inside the house. My denominator goes outside the house. 8 can't go into 1, so I have to add a decimal point and a 0. 8 goes into 10 one time, which is 8. I subtract and get 2. I add another 0 and bring it down. 8 goes into 22 times. 2 times 8 is 16. I subtract and get 4. I add another 0 and bring it down. 8 goes into 45 times, which is 40. I have no remainder left. Okay? I look at the top and I see that my decimal for my final answer is 0.125. I'm going to put a box around that, and that is how we change a fraction into a decimal. Okay. The very last box that I'm going to do is changing a fraction into a percent. Fraction, changing it to a percent. Okay, it's going to be a couple of steps, so go ahead and open this one up. The first step is to convert the fraction to a decimal by dividing. Convert the fraction to a decimal by dividing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and draw an arrow to the box next door because we just went over how to change a fraction to a decimal through division. Okay, step number 2 is going to be to then change the decimal into a percent. Change the decimal to a percent. Okay, and we did decimals to percents up in this box, so if you have a question about how to do that, then you need to look at that box. Okay, the example that we're going to do, we're going to do 1/8. Okay, step number 1 is to change the fraction into a decimal by dividing. The next step is to take that decimal, 0.125. I'm going to rewrite it, 0.125. 12.5, and it's to change the decimal into a percent. If you remember, we changed a decimal into a percent by moving the decimal point 2 spaces to the right. So if I take my decimal point and I move it 2 spaces to the right, it ends up between the 2 and the 5. So I now have 12.5. Don't forget your percent symbol, and that will be my final answer. So 1/8 as a percent is 12.5%. The very last thing that you're going to do is you're just going to glue it in. Okay, so go ahead and make sure that it's centered so you can see both of your hands on either side. And then this is what your note should look like for class tomorrow.